Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by Feedspot as one of the top 10 obsessive-compulsive disorder podcasts. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at FamilyOCD.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at FamilyOCD.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, simply visit FamilyOCD.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. The following podcast is part 2 in my 4-part series on food and anxiety. This podcast was originally recorded in 2017. I felt it still held true today and fit perfectly with this series, and it actually talks about specific foods that cause majority of the issues of anxiety. So enjoy my conversation with Dr. Sheila Kilbane. Today I have the honor and privilege of introducing a friend, Dr. Sheila Kilbane. I've known Sheila for about 5 years now and really admire her work that she does with kids and helping them get through their illnesses naturally. Sheila Kilbane, MD, is a board-certified pediatrician in the U.S. who is also trained in integrative medicine with Dr. Andrew Weil. She uses the best of traditional and integrative medicine to help families find the root cause of their child's illness. She walks families through her 7-step process to significantly improve or resolve altogether illnesses such as colic, reflux, eczema, recurrent ear and sinus infections, asthma, allergies, and stomach and GI issues like constipation, abdominal pain, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. In addition to seeing individual patients in her unique clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina, she also gives educational lectures to parents and healthcare professionals. If you don't have an integrative pediatrician in your area, Dr. Kilbane has written a book, Healthy Kids, Happy Moms, a step-by-step guide to improving many common childhood illnesses, and has an online course, 7 Steps to Healthy Kids, Happy Moms, to help you resolve your child's illness using her step-by-step approach. You can find all of these links to Dr. Kilbane on the website, invisiblewheelchair.com. And now, let's get to the interview itself. Well, Dr. Kilbane, thank you so much for being part of this day. I'm so happy to have you on the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. Again, I thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. I know how much work it is to put things like this together, and I so appreciate that you're getting this message out to parents because it's so needed. So thank you, and I'm honored to be here.
Let's start off, if you would, if you want to tell just a little bit about like yourself, your story, however you want to put that out there to the world.
Yeah, so I'm an integrative pediatrician, so that means that after I did my regular pediatric training, I started practicing, and then I went on and did another 2 years of training in something called integrative medicine with Andrew Weil. He's that guy with the big white beard who's written lots of cookbooks and lots of books on the integrative approach, so the holistic approach to health. I did that because when I first got out of residency and was practicing, I realized first of all, I was running from room to room every 10 to 15 minutes, which is really stressful. I was giving steroids, antibiotics, and the steroids could be on topical, they might be inhaled, they might be oral, sometimes we injected them. I was miserable, and I wasn't helping these kids. I was putting a Band-Aid on things. They would get better for 2 weeks when they were on the medication. We'd stop the medication, and they'd get worse over the next 2 weeks. So those were the kids that were in the office every month. When I started to realize the profound impact that nutrition had, started making these changes and really helping the families clean up these children, the gut health in these children, these chronic conditions were melting away. And those were things like reflux, recurrent ear infections, recurrent sinus infections, chronic runny nose, dark circles under the eyes, mouth breathing, snoring, bumps on the back of the arms, asthma, allergies, constipation, abdominal pain. But what I also realized is there were many other beneficial side effects, or I thought there were side effects at the time, being anxiety would decrease, mood swings would improve, sleep would improve, tics would improve, obsessive compulsive type behaviors would improve. So I was always looking at that point in my career at the physical side of things, but what I came to understand is that this also impacted many of the things that we would, consider more of psychiatric type issues. So that was just extraordinarily eye-opening. And it was after I started to realize this, and for a while I thought it was a fluke. I just thought, surely if this worked so well, somebody in all of my training would have told me about this. But it just isn't at that time when I was training, it wasn't in the curriculum at all. So it was many years before I actually was convinced. And then, went and studied with Andrew Weil about the science behind all of it. So that's what led me down this path now. And now that's all I do is integrative medicine with children.
Well, that's wonderful. So you mentioned in there talking about anxiety and of course the OCD and tics, which of course I know, and I think you know too, that I see most of these different disorders we talk about are really anxiety based. And so what I'd like, if you could, is to talk about the relationship between nutrition, of what we eat, and how it affects or works against or with anxiety.
So the first thing I'll do is share with you a case, and he had tics, but I kind of, categorize tics and anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder in, kind of group them because a lot of times they go hand in hand. This was a particular case of a little boy who came in, and his tics were so bad that he pulled a muscle in his neck. So we went and followed the steps that I go through with these families, and we first pulled dairy out of his diet, and we didn't see any change. So then we actually, at that point in time, I did it a little differently than I do now, but we put the dairy back in, and then we pulled the gluten out of his diet. And when we pulled gluten out, his tics improved by about 80%. Wow. But not only did the tics improve, but I have a picture, whenever I do talks, I show pictures of him, of the before and after. Because before, he was pale skin, big dark circles under his eyes. He did not have a very clear look. It was almost like a blunted look to him. And then after a year with new nutrition, and we replaced the things that he needed in his gut, like probiotics, omega-3 fats, vitamin D, iron, zinc, then he started absorbing his nutrients from his food effectively and efficiently. His system was not so inflamed, and he looks like a different child. And the family brought me those photos because it made such a profound difference in his life, and they wanted other parents to know this. And that's why I know, Don, you and I are similar in this, is that we've seen it firsthand many, many, many times, and we want to scream it from a mountaintop. Because if you know that there is another way to help your child, who wouldn't go to the moon to help their child? And sometimes it can be a little difficult changing nutrition for a child because the whole family has to change. I don't think it's fair to take one child off of dairy and everybody else at home is, having cheese every day. So we really do it as a group effort. It makes such a big difference.
So, Dr. Kilbane, what it sounds like to me in your story about the little boy is that you're talking about leaky gut, as it's called. And I think most people are getting to know that terminology and probably still a little confused about it, about the brain and gut connection. So maybe you could explain a little bit of that and talk a little bit about around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in integrative and functional medicine, we really take a deep dive into the gut. So what leaky gut means is that we have inflammation in our gut. Our GI tract plays such a critical role in our overall health, our immune system. We literally learn about the gut. We call it the little brain in the gut in medical school and residency. And it's because the same neurotransmitters and hormones that impact the brain also impact the gut. When we're talking about anxiety, OCD, tics, things like that, we want to make sure that we have optimized the health of the gut, because that's going to ensure that we are making our neurotransmitters properly so that we can have, the smoothest, if you will, nervous system as possible, so that our kids' nervous systems can function optimally. Kids or adults, it's the same concept applies. When we approach it from that standpoint, we look at different foods. We usually start with food in my practice because that's one of the big places that we have the most control over. So in terms of inflammation, that, leaky gut is inflammation, and so inflammation in the body is inflammation in the brain. And there are 5 things, in the way that I have simplified it down, there are 5 things that cause inflammation. It's food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, stress, and infectious disease. So we just, we go through, and, my job as a pediatrician is to make sure we look at each of those. But the one that we typically focus on the most, and that we'll talk about the most today, is food. 2 of the big categories of food that can impact the brain and our behavior are dairy and gluten. So gluten is a protein that's in barley, wheat, and rye. It has 3 effects on our systems. The first one is inflammation. Casein is the protein that's in dairy that creates this inflammation, or, one of the proteins that can create this inflammation. So with casein and gluten, they can cause inflammation. They have an opiate-like effect. So literally, the proteins, there's a protein called casomorphine or gliadomorphine that they get broken down into. Those get absorbed into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, but they bind to the opiate receptors. But since we know we have a lot of the same receptors in our gut that we have in our GI tract, those are also binding to the gut. And that's where, for some kids who have OCD, they may also have either loose stools or runny stools. And that can be part of that, is that opiate-like effect. It's also where you get, I always listen to parents when they tell me, it's like the kids, they can't help their behavior. They can't help what's going on. And that's where I'm always thinking, okay, are they getting the opiate effect from gluten and dairy? And then the third impact is glutamate. So glutamate is an amino acid, which is the basic building block of protein. Amino acids are the basic building blocks of proteins. Glutamate, it's not only an amino acid, but it's also an excitatory neurotransmitter. We know it in the public as monosodium glutamate, or MSG. Most people know to stay away from that when they're eating. And I remember, years ago it was always, you would often find it in Chinese restaurants. It's almost like a food enhancement. It's, for some kids, that can be really problematic. And if they have anything going on, we start to look at, okay, is glutamate impacting them? I hope that makes sense, but those are the three impacts that gluten and dairy can make. And I think it's a combination most of the time with these kids. And with my patient who had tics, I think all three of those reasons are parts of the reasons why he had such an improvement off of gluten.
So I heard you say in there about the opiate effect. Does that make it somewhat addictive then too?
Yeah, so have you ever seen, and the opiates are things like morphine. So they're, in nature, morphine is, originally it's a plant. So opiates are any kind of a morphine type substance. And obviously the opiates that we find in gluten and dairy have a much milder effect on the body than, say, morphine that you would take as a pain medication. Because it is addictive, you will see kids, when we take kids off of dairy, we do it over a 3-week period of time, or at least, 3, 4, however long it takes, because if we stop it cold turkey, they get worse. Their behavior gets worse, they get irritable, sometimes their sleep gets worse because they're having a withdrawal type effect. So what we do is we just gradually walk them off it. Thank you for asking that question, because that's a very, very important point. And I learned that the hard way over the years.
That just recently came into my realm, just understanding it. I don't remember who explained it, but I thought that was really interesting, that, the opiate kind of idea in dairy and milk, so I can now I can understand how people can get so enticed with it,
Oh yeah, I mean, I always talk about it. You never, sometimes kids will just be yelling and hollering for their milk. You never see them do that for an apple or a peach, right?
We wish they would, but
Right, exactly.
now you also, if I remember right, you talk not just about those two, but there's like a list of maybe 5, because I think sugar is one, dyes are another one, because I know I personally know the dye factor and how it affected my daughter. Maybe if you wouldn't mind just take a minute to talk about, those other ones besides the gluten and dairy, which are big ones.
So when it comes to the actual foods, so there are 11 foods that cause 90% of our issues. So it's dairy, soy, wheat, which is gluten, corn, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, citrus, and sesame. The citrus and sesame are much further down on the chain of allergenic, but those top ones, those are really the foods where the proteins have much more of an ability to be allergenic in our systems, especially when you have a leaky gut. And it doesn't mean that all of those foods are unhealthy. It just means that if you have a leaky gut and if you have something going on, whether it's physically or emotionally, those are the foods that we want to be looking at. And in the adult world, a lot of adult integrative or functional medical practitioners will have adults go off of all of those foods at one time. We don't do that in the pediatric realm. I think it's too hard, and I think the kids get miserable, the parents are miserable, so we just do it. I call it's a selective elimination diet. So those are the food groups, and then we have the other, our other categories. So food dyes are a really great example. I've had kids one little boy who with red dye would flap his hands, almost like a child on the autism spectrum. And another little boy who, if he had caramel color, would sniff his fingers. And he had ADHD, and so the artificial dyes made it worse for him. And you have to be really careful with the artificial dyes, because they can be in medications, they can be in vitamins that you buy over the counter, like at drugstores. You really have to search everything. And of course candies, Skittles, M&Ms, all of those things have artificial dyes and colors in them. Sugar is another one. So sugar, we eat on average, I think it's 22 teaspoons of sugar a day. the average American. The recommendations by the American Heart Association ranges anywhere from 3 teaspoons to, 7 or 8 teaspoons. And we are just way overboard on that. Sugar not only creates ups and downs because it's causing our body to secrete a lot of insulin, and then our blood sugar drops, and then our adrenal glands secrete our stress hormones, and then that is going to make us jittery. That's going to make us more anxious. Sugar also suppresses the immune system. So there are so many impacts that sugar has on the body. The more we can just try and get it in natural things like fruits and really cut out a lot of the simple carbs and the processed foods, that can make a really big difference for these kiddos.
Is it the fact that, like for instance, wheat with gluten, the way we farm it now and the way we grow it, where the problem really started? Because was wheat always the problem? In other words, is it about the grain itself, or is it how we are now, the way we grow it and mass grow it? Is that really the effect that's causing the problem? Or is wheat in way back maybe 20, 30 years ago when we grew wheat, was it more pure and better for, would have been better? I don't know if that's a good question or not, but it's a thought.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's what a lot of us are trying to figure out right now, is why is everybody getting all of these food allergies? I mean, I myself had such a huge improvement in my health when I went off of gluten. And I ate gluten as a child. I think around college is when I developed more of a sensitivity to it. But I also took antibiotics for 6 months of my life as a young child. So I don't know if that impacted it. It goes back to absolutely we process it differently. We're using pesticides, and many people out there have heard of something called Roundup. And that is a pesticide that gets sprayed on wheat. And they actually spray it on after the wheat crop has grown and it's sitting in the field. They spray it on and just let it soak in, because that makes it easier to harvest. There are a lot of people now doing research looking at when did that really get introduced and started to become mainstream in manufactured farming, and when did these food allergies, food sensitivities begin? I don't think there's no perfect science right now saying that there is a direct cause, but when you look at the numbers and the graphs, it certainly is looking like we need to be very cognizant of that. The other thing is we eat far more wheat and processed food than we ever did 100 years ago. We will wake up and have a bagel and cream cheese for breakfast or cereal. Then at lunchtime we'll have a piece of pizza, and then at dinner time we may have a bowl of pasta. So we're bombarding our systems with simple carbohydrates. I think that has as much to do with, the way we become so much more sick in a chronic way. Yes, we are living longer, but we are more obese, we have more heart disease, more diabetes, more food allergies than we ever have before. Many, many people who don't tolerate wheat in the U.S. tolerate it when they go to Europe, because they don't allow genetically modified crops into their environment. And that would be a 2-hour podcast to talk about that. That's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, I've had enough families tell me that you really, sit up and take notice, what are we doing as we're genetically modifying our crops? So, what are we doing to our systems with that?
The last thing I was going to ask you is just what types of, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but what kind of obstacles do you run into in your practice, common ones that you run into all the time?
That is such a good question, and I think I'm so lucky because this is all I do. Many families have been reading about nutrition. They've gone to many doctors. They've tried all the medications, and so they are ready. And they're not questioning whether it's going to work. They're questioning if they are going to be able to implement it. In terms of nutrition, in terms of, feeding your children at school, at grandparents, at cousin's house. So it's really, what I also find is that many, many times the parents have changed their own nutrition and they've seen such huge improvements in their own health. that they want to do it for their kids, but they don't know the steps to take, and they worry if we take them off of dairy, are they not going to have healthy bones and
Uh,
all that kind of thing. So that's where I have written a book. I have a book on Amazon. I have an online course because there just aren't that many pediatricians around the world trained this way. And so I always want parents to feel good about doing it and not worried that they're not giving their child certain nutrients, because I have done this for years. If we just do it step by step and very slowly, it makes a huge impact. And the research is out there for a lot of these different conditions. It's just it hasn't gotten into the mainstream conventional medical world.
well, we could probably talk about this for all day, but I think
Absolutely could.
because there's just so much that around this, and I really want to get it out there. So maybe another time we'll do more and then figure something to dig deeper. But I think for now, you've answered a lot. What I'd ask you now is if you could, one, tell them the name of your book and how people can get a hold of you, like website, phone number, all of that. That would be great.
Absolutely. So my book is called Healthy Kids, Happy Moms, a step-by-step guide to improving many common childhood issues or illnesses. And if you just Google my name on Amazon, Sheila Kilbane, it will come up. And then my online course is called 7 Steps to Healthy Kids and Healthy Kids, Happy Moms. And that Don will have a link for that. It's just the link to get the course is called 7 Steps to Healthy Kids and Happy Moms.com/standard. So that's a little bit long. So hopefully he'll have that. If you
I'll have all that up on there.
And I have an office. I see individual patients, and we do see families from other states outside of North Carolina. You just have to come to Charlotte for at least one of the visits. And I have an amazing team, and they organize it so that we get as much done at the visit when you come to see us, so that we can do, some of the follow-up by phone or by video, so that you don't have to come to Charlotte every single time. And it's just, our office number is 704-626-6771, and then the website is sheilakilbane.com. I'd love to leave families with what is the one tip that we can do tomorrow that could start to make a difference? My biggest recommendation is add a green smoothie to breakfast. And if you can start to make breakfast so that it is, you're not eating dairy and wheat or gluten at breakfast, sometimes that is a great start. And you could have, a smoothie with spinach, maybe a small fourth of a banana, half a cup of frozen berries, and if there's any other fruit that your kids like, and then you can use water as the base because the banana will make it creamy. Then you could have maybe some eggs, even a piece of leftover chicken, grass-fed beef burger, a piece of salmon. I'd much rather a child have a breakfast like that than the pancakes, the waffles, the cereals, things like that.
And you do have, I think you do, if I remember it, you have those smoothie recipes on your website, do you not?
I have a lot of recipes in the book and in the online course.
We'll have all that up on the website. And Sheila, again, I thank you so much for being part of this. You are a fantastic pediatrician, and I'm so happy to be associated with you and to know you. And I appreciate all this that you've done here today.
Well, thank you. And you are always a hoot, Don. I always love doing anything with you. Don and I just laugh whenever we see each other.
That concludes this interview podcast. Please leave me a comment or question below. That gives me good direction where to go on future podcasts and interviews. I would love to hear your invisible wheelchair stories if you are willing to share it. If you would go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. I want to remind you that OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is treatable. I can help you get past OCD. So, if you have heard this interview podcast and other podcasts, and you feel like you need further assistance and would like to spend some time with me working through any issues you have, then feel free to book a session at FocusHealthyFamily.com or FamilyOCD.com, or call me at 704-562-1630. I also offer $85 off of your initial discovery session if you mention that you heard it on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life to new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.